Welcome to the Sharon Fitzmaurice podcast. This podcast is brought to you in association with Retreats Ireland. If you would like to check out any of my work or upcoming events, please check out sharonfitzmauricemindfulness.com. So my guest today is Dr. Andrea LaFountain, a neuroscientist, theologian, author, and speaker. She's passionate about how truth is defined by the Bible, processed through our cognitive system, and manifested in our behaviour. So you were born in Manchester, England, raised in Donegal, Ireland, and she now lives in Wallingford, Pennsylvania. Andrea, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me.
Oh, it's lovely to have you here. So I was very fascinated to see all of your beautiful combination of skills and learnings throughout your lifetime, and really was interested to find out why you combined neuroscience, theology, and behavior in your work. And was that kind of a personal turning point that you moved forward into that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Sharon. From a very young age, I've always had a desire to help people understand themselves. And even, as a young child, I didn't know the word psychology.
Mm.
Um, but I remember at times going out for a walk with my mom, in the evenings up in Donegal. And I think there's also a little bit of a gift of prophecy there because we would walk around the neighborhood and I would say to mom, the lady in that house, she's very depressed. You should invite her down for tea. And my mum would say, well, you don't even know that lady. Why would you say she's depressed? And then, a little further along, I'd say, in that house, the husband has been abusive to, the woman there. And my mother would tell me off saying, don't you be starting rumors like that. You have no idea what's going on in that house. You shouldn't be talking like that. And I said, but mum, it's true. Why don't you invite her, in for tea? And mum would say, well, how do you know that? And I don't know how I know. I just know. So I've always been able to kind of discern, what's going on in people's world, and felt an obligation to help to speak into that.
Mm.
Now later, when I was, 16, 17, and doing the Leaving Cert and applying for colleges, I now knew the word psychology. So I thought, that's what I'm called. It felt like a real calling, not just a desire.
Mm.
So I went to university in Belfast, and then I did a master's, both in applied psychology. Still was hungry for more, and then that's when I did the PhD in neuroscience to get really down into how people think. Why do they think the way they think?
Mm.
And then after wow, 25 years of that, I realized that there was still something missing. And that's when I went back to college just recently to do my master's in theology. And that now has allowed me to have a much more fuller appreciation for what's going on with people. Like, how are they moving in life? The psychology by itself, I mean, it was great, but there was something missing. And
Mm.
the theology opened up a whole new dimension of the person for me.
Amazing, yes. And in your own story of life, you were brought up a Protestant, and then you, do we say converted, or is that a word to use, that you looked more to the Catholic faith?
Well, actually, I was raised Catholic in Donegal.
Mm.
Went through, the parish school, national school, and then for my high school, I actually went to a convent.
Mm.
And it was only when I went to university that I stepped away from all of that.
Mm.
Now, I don't know whether it was as simple as I preferred to lie in bed on a Sunday after having been out on Saturday night,
Yeah.
but it's also coupled with what was going on in Belfast in the 90s, between Catholics and Protestants. So to say that you were a Catholic was not a good thing. Like there was nothing holy about it. It just reeked of division and fighting. And the same if you were to say you were a Protestant, the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not a holy mantle, it's a side of the fence that you're on, and what side are you fighting? So it kind of lost its sense of religion or holiness. It didn't mean any of that. But I did, when I was in England doing my PhD, I met a guy from Philadelphia and we fell in love and, started dating. And he was Protestant and he was very adamant that he was Protestant.
Mm.
I wasn't adamant that I was anything. So
Mm.
when we got married, it was in a Protestant church. And it didn't matter to me where we were to be married. In fact, my mom did phone the a local priest in Donegal, and when she mentioned that my fiance was Protestant, he just railed at her and
Wow.
said, "Well, your daughter and her heathen husband will be doomed to hell for all eternity."
Oh my goodness.
So that was quite a dramatic response. I hadn't anticipated that at all. My mother obviously was furious. And so we got married in the Protestant church, and that suited me fine.
Mm.
So, that was in 2000 or 99 actually. And then we got married in Donegal town. And then in 2000, we moved to America and I just integrated immediately into the Protestant church and only came back to the Catholic faith. And I think they use the term reversion.
Mm.
Um, if you were Catholic and then kind of went away and then came
Mm.
back, a reversion just a year and a half ago, or 2 years at Easter.
Mm.
And so that was quite dramatic for my husband, um, feeling that pull. Um, so he took sacraments of communion and confirmation. They call it reconciliation now. It was confirmation when I was
Yes.
going through it. And so he's absolutely loving the Catholic experience.
How does it differ for you? And again, for people listening to the podcast who may have, been brought up like you in the Catholic religion and maybe have left or don't practice, and they hear people then, like you, brought up Catholic, moving to the Protestant religion, and then reversion back into the Catholicism again. What was the draw for you, Andrea? What was that pull for you?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was very much an intellectual pull. My husband, it was very much an emotional pull. And you know that I talk in my book, Loving God, about heart, soul, and mind. And we have those three dimensions to our humanity. And we're supposed to be working in the fullness of all three of those, the fullness of our heart, the fullness of our mind, the fullness of our soul. Christ said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your mind, and all of your soul. But the truth is, we might even be very weak on one of those three. I've always been strong on the mind approach to life. So the trigger for me going back to the Catholic Church was doing my seminary experience here in Philadelphia. I went to a Protestant university, and the Protestant theology is just very weak. It feels very naive in a lot of ways. It's at best a couple of 100 years old, whereas the Catholic theology is 2,000 years old. The theologians that have been pursuing thought in the Catholic Church are much, much deeper and richer and broader. So when I was writing my essays from the library of a Protestant university, it just wasn't scratching the itch. I'm like, this isn't right. There's more to it. My question has not been answered fully for my satisfaction. It
Mm,
might satisfy the scoring rubric that I can get an A, but I wasn't doing the master's in theology so that I could get A's. I was doing it so that I could have a thorough understanding of theology. And I just felt it wasn't coming. So I invariably found myself in the Catholic literature. And that's where the richness and the depth was coming from. So I would debate with my husband, lots of different issues. One of them is, we shouldn't baptize infants because they don't have a mind to
mm,
accept Christ for themselves. Yet somewhere else in the same program, they were teaching us that baptism is a pure gift from God. It's a pure grace. We bring nothing to the table. We just receive that as a gift. So I'm
mm,
thinking, well, then why can't the infants be baptized? Why is one professor telling me we have to bring something to the table, and another one is telling me we bring nothing to the table? So I would argue these things with my husband, and every single argument, I was able to defeat his Protestant thinking. So for me, the drawback was an intellectual one.
mm,
Um, but over that experience of the 2 years doing that master's and discussing it with my husband, he was learning, and the Holy Spirit was kind of pulling at his emotional side and kind of just stirring things in him. So that when we
mm,
did try the Catholic Church after I graduated and said, why don't we try the Catholic Church? He said, okay. He didn't say, what? He said, okay. And we went and he wept for the entire Mass.
mm.
Yeah.
Powerful. It is
Yeah.
amazing, and hearing your story. And I like the fact that you're coming from an intellectual point and you have, I suppose, being a part of two different religions and then studying further into it to find out more. So, what role does the brain play in faith? And do you think spirituality is hardwired into our own biology or as individuals?
I think spirituality is hardwired into us, but I wouldn't call that either the brain or the biology. I would say that's the soul.
Mm,
And I see our soul very akin to the umbilical cord between mother and child. It's there, and the child's life depends on it. If that umbilical cord gets severed, the bond between the mother and the child is ruined, and death is the result. I see the same spiritual function is the soul.
mm,
That is our bond to God. Um, and it's spiritual. It's not biological, the same way
mm,
as the umbilical cord. It's spiritual. So regardless of what happens in our biology, that spiritual bond is there. In my book, I talk about Genesis 2:7, where it says, God created man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So that's why I attach it to the soul. God's breath coursing through our veins is not a biological phenomenon.
mm,
It's not a neuroscientific phenomenon. It's a
mm,
purely spiritual phenomenon, but it is as real as our kidneys or our brain
mm.
or our blood. It is that real.
So, coming from somebody that has a deep understanding and a deep passion and love for their religion, what do you say to people that have no religion? They were never brought up in any kind of faith. They believe you're just here. When you're gone, and that's it. And they seem to get on pretty well with their lives. And then you have this very passionate view of your faith and of life. What would you say to that person that looked at you and said, "It's all fantasy, Andrea. I don't believe any of it."
Yeah, well, and comes down to, do you believe that, the soul exists, right? That's the
Mm,
spiritual form of humanity. So even if you don't believe Genesis 2:7, I remember when my father died and in Donegal, and I went over with my husband and I had four children then, I now have five. And my four boys were fairly young. I guess the oldest was 10. And then they were 8, 7, and 5. And in America, we don't do wakes. So they had never been to a wake before.
wow.
So, there was the wake in my family home in Donegal, and the children were there. And Granddad, we said to them before they went to bed, Granddad's probably not going to make it through the night. You
Mm,
should come and say goodbye. And so they all said goodbye. And then they said, what do you mean that he's not going to make it through the night? I said, well, he's going to be, in heaven. I said he'll be dead. I said his body will still be here. And so they were a little bit freaked out. You mean there's going to be a dead body in our house in the
yeah.
morning? And I said, yes. I said it will be Granddad's body.
Mm,
I said, but it won't be like Granddad because his soul will be in heaven. So when they came down the next day and, Dad did pass that night, um, over the course of the day, they sheepishly went in to see, the dead body. And they recognized that, okay, it looks like Granddad, it's a body of Granddad, but it's not Granddad. So where is Granddad then?
mm,
And I don't think you can ignore that question. What is different about Granddad's body versus what Granddad was like the day before? Something is clearly missing. All his body parts are there. We didn't cut him open, but I know if we did, we'd find his kidneys and his stomach and his
mm,
ribs. But something was missing. What was missing? You have to put a label on that. His
mm,
life was missing. What is that? And where has it gone?
mm.
So even from a physics perspective, they say energy cannot be
Destroy.
created or destroyed. Well,
Mm,
then where is the energy then? If we
mm,
all acknowledge it hasn't disappeared, then it's just moved into some other form. What is that form? So you
mm,
can even bring science into it.
mm,
And the medicine books of old used to talk about that, and they didn't shy away from it. They talked about the departure of the soul from the body.
mm,
Um, and for my children who had not been indoctrinated in any particular way at that age, could see it very clearly
mm,
that the soul, the life is gone, the soul is gone. So I think when we look at death, I think it begs the question, there must be something more. And when we look at life, we don't have that connection with our soul. We're not feeding it, we're not working it, we're not nurturing it, we're not acknowledging it. There's always that desire for something more and that recognition, even if it just is, surely there must be something more to life than this. Even that rudimentary question is acknowledging, yes, there's a gap there. You
mm,
need to go find it. Where are you going to find that?
mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I like when you said, in science that energy can't be created nor destroyed. So again, I would always believe like that essence of the person, the soul of the person, whatever people would like to call it, that it still exists beyond the physical. Now, the question, of course, that is going to be there for mankind until we transition from this earthly world ourselves is where do we go? And in the Catholic faith, they believe in heaven, which again, I think can be different people's interpretations of heaven and what that is going to be like for them. What would your interpretation of heaven be, Andrea?
Wow, your questions are very deep, Sharon. Um, I love it. My interpretation of heaven is union with God. Whether that's a place or it's just a spiritual realm or some dimension that our minds just cannot possibly fathom right now. I believe it's the union with God, in perfect union with God, that we have put away the ways of the world. We drop anything that would compromise a full relationship with God. We're not consumed with, how pretty our home is, or whether we can afford the mortgage, or, our reputation on the streets. None of the worldly criteria matter. It all falls away because we are in the presence of God. And I do believe that the soul longs for that, whether you acknowledge it or not. And I think once you do acknowledge it and you allow the soul to find its way, it will just carry you and you will recognize it. And the more you fall into that, the deeper and deeper it goes. It's like, a cycle, or spiral, an upward spiral, that the soul is just, if you allow it its freedom to find God, it will definitely find God. I think for those who are not finding God, they are actively prohibiting. They are actively choosing to suppress, whether that's at a conscious level or not. But once you allow the freedom of the soul to do that, you can sense that it is searching for God, and it will find it one day. And that's what I think heaven is. It's that perfect union back to God, free from sin, free from worldly worries and worldly constraints, just back to what we were originally designed for, to love God.
Is there a place in your mind or in your life where you can see us finding all of that without having a belief in God? That there is an inner awareness, a relationship with ourselves, with our own soul, whether that is connected to God or to the universe or to the consciousness of every living creature and person on this planet. For
I think,
me, sorry, go on
yeah,
ahead,
I,
Andrew.
I
Yeah.
think perhaps. And I would caveat that with by God's mercy. So if we don't acknowledge that the beauty and the love and the creativity that is in our world is from God, I think God will still allow us to enjoy that, to recognize it, to appreciate, the universe and the galaxies and the cosmos and the beauty of, bluebells in spring. I think we can all appreciate that. I find it almost impossible when I go back to Donegal to stand out there on the rocks of the Atlantic Ocean and
Mm.
not be compelled at the power and glory of God. Now, before I was deep in my faith, like after I went to college and wasn't really pursuing much of a faith, I still, whenever I stood on those rocks, felt an overwhelming power and glory of the world, of the
Mm.
universe, of the cosmos. And I believe that was God's grace, just allowing me to experience that. I didn't stand there and think, oh, the waves are bigger today than yesterday, and make it, a mathematical or
Mm.
intellectual calculation. Even though I am intellectually driven, I didn't look at that as an intellectual. I felt something deep. Now I would say in my soul. Other people might say in my person or in my psyche. You can use whatever terminology you want. But I think it's God's mercy that is allowing us into that. And I think, on Judgment Day, and, when we pass from this life to the next, Jesus will say, okay, you understood it a little differently,
Mm.
but you got it. You got that this world has a mighty power in it. Whether you labeled it God or something else, maybe he's going to say, I'm going to give you my mercy because, by the way, all of that beauty and majesty that you recognize deep inside yourself, that was me.
Mm.
Welcome to my world, he may say.
And when you speak about God, in your mind or in your belief, obviously a higher power, creator of the world, creator of all of us, is our God that is with us every day? Is it an all-loving God, or is it a God that has to be feared now, as we were taught in the Catholic Church many, many years ago?
I think it's both because the God of the Old Testament was very law bound. You know, he gave the law, and we were expected to obey that. And like with parenting, when my children disobeyed, there was consequence. And they didn't like that. Now, they wouldn't describe me as a mother of wrath, but they would have certainly described me as a mother who disciplines. And whenever I would discipline my children, I even spoke to them there recently, do you remember what I used to say? And they did. And I would always preface it with, this is the worst part of parenting. I hate disciplining you.
Mm.
My heart doesn't want to do it, but I know I need to. And then I would, discipline them and I would say to them before and after, I love you. I don't love you any less because of your bad behavior, or the discipline is not a sign that I love you any less. And then I would discipline them and say, I still love you just as much as I have ever loved you. So the God of the New Testament is very different. Christ manifests the love of God. Christ also manifested, his righteous anger when God's house was misused, and he did not tolerate that. I don't see that as a contradiction. I don't see that as two separate gods. I see it as, yes, God is love, first and foremost. If we were just to take one adjective to describe God, we say God is love, but we should also fear him. You know, I think if, the President of the United States was coming to visit me in my home, there would be a little bit of fear and intrepidation there, just because of the power there. Or if somebody was going to meet the Queen, your adrenaline is running. There would be a little bit of anxiety there. But fundamentally, God is a God of love.
Mm. And it's interesting when you say that, because I'm not a practicing Catholic now, because again, as you know, in Ireland, we were forced into religion. It was forced upon us. And I suppose when, a bit like you, when I had the choice to say, I'm going to go and find my own way, I'm going to study, I'm going to learn a little bit more about every aspect of the world and who I am in it. And part of my learning, Andrea, was I found God in everything and everywhere, including myself. And I believe that as I'm speaking to you, you are God and I am God, and there is aspects of his essence speaking through us in what we've learned. And again, I remember saying to somebody, how would God, if God is all loving and God is this amazing person, why does he let so many atrocities happen in the world? Why does he have, terrible priests in the Catholic Church that do so many unjust things? And there is no answer for that, because, again, if you look at it, that God is all powerful, but he is all loving. And I would always say, well, if God made man, but man made himself, and we all have choices depending on where we have come from in our backgrounds, what our mental health issues, our environments, societal, everything has an impact on us. What do you say to anybody that looks at you and says, I don't believe it, Andrea? And I've asked you this in a way because there has been such division with religion all over the world. But how can religion bring unity instead of so much division? And there's a lot of sorrow around it at the moment. And if I was to say that was God, I'd say, well, that's not God to me. That's just people and organizations that have created that division.
I would absolutely agree. That is not God's plan. God did not create us for division. In fact, He created us for community, community with Him. But man chose to step out of that union. The same as, two people can get married, and the goal there is to love one another till death do you part. But, we see the divorce rates. That doesn't happen. Either one or both will choose to renege on the love, and their selfishness will dominate, and that marriage will dissolve. And that's what's happened in our relationship with God. God endowed us with free will. And of course, he had to do that for us to have a free love relationship with him. But every time there's a free love relationship, like in marriage, there's the opportunity for a free selfish relationship, or even more extreme, an evil relationship. Evil is true in the world. There's no denying it. I also believe that that is spiritual. I do believe that there are powers and principalities of the dark world at play. And sometimes I even feel they are dominating and taking the upper hand. Now, that causes me to cry out to God and say, Lord, how long are you going to allow not just man in his free will, but demons and principalities of a dark world to freely reign? He does allow free reign. He does. Now, I wish he would at least take the spiritual darkness out. Don't give them any free will, Lord. Don't give them free will, but keep me with free will, right? And I'm not
Mm.
saying that selfishly. I think, yes, humanity has to have free will to enter into a free choice of whether to love or not. But we would fare much better if we didn't have these dark influences of the spiritual world constantly pounding on us. So when any of us commits sin, whether it's, me towards, my child, or a priest towards an altar boy, how much of that is selfishly driven? How much of it is pushed on us by, the evil forces at the world? I don't know. Sometimes, when I do Bible studies and the other women are saying, oh, it's the enemy. My response is often, geez, I have enough evil in myself. I can manage to find my
Mm.
own way into sin. I don't need any help from anybody on that.
Mm.
So I think sometimes we kind of flip-flop too much emphasis either way. Like sometimes people will say, no, it's all the dark world that's pushing that. And other times people will say, oh, wretched person I am. It's probably a combination of both. We are fallen humanity in a fallen world with darkness around. At any point, God could come in and pull all of that away. Why he doesn't? I think it's because he is allowing the world its freedom to play out as we choose it to be. He would hope for love, he would hope for unity and communion, but left to our own devices, we can make a pretty rotten mess of that. I don't blame God for evil. I blame fallen man, and more so the powers of darkness. I never blame God for evil.
When you say the powers of darkness, Andrea, how can you explain that, please?
I see that as the fallen angels who, Lucifer, Satan, who was cast out of heaven, created in pureness, but defied God in his pride, wanting to usurp God. God threw him out with a third of the angels, and they are now reigning on earth. They're not just innocently standing by watching us as we wait at the bus stop. They are prowling around the world looking to ruin souls. That is their purpose. They don't have any other purpose than death and destruction. That is real. Um, if you pay attention to the supernatural world, you can definitely see it at play. I've spoken to my kids, I've said to them, a couple of times before when they were younger, I'm looking out the window and I'm like, come see, look what's out here, come. And they all come run into the window expecting to see something. I'm like, what do you see? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, yeah, neither do I. But I know there's a spiritual world out there, but we're just not seeing it. I said, and I would ask them, why do you think God has shut our eyes to that? And they're like, well, I don't know that I would want to see that. I said, yeah, I think that's why. Because if we could see all of that with our physical eyes, I think we would be terrified. I think we really would be. And I know some people do have, well, I don't know whether it's a gift or a curse, but some people do have the ability to see that. I
Mm.
have the ability to sense it. Like I can sense when evil invades my space. I don't see anything with my physical eyes, but my spiritual eyes is definitely keen to that. And I think if you open yourself up to acknowledging that there's a spiritual world out there and pray for discernment, if you are a praying person, your spiritual antenna will definitely dial up. And there's no denying it for me.
Mm. And do you believe that this darkness or this evil is at play through our politics, through our world leaders? Because there has been a lot of mistakes with a lot of our leaders all over the world, and there's so much, again, division. And sometimes you see it as, and religion, it's based on religion and greed
Yeah.
and power. And you're just, and again, I suppose maybe that's why people are saying now, Andrea, is like religions cause a lot of wars, and whose religion is right and whose religion is best. So for me, I would say then I will cut out religion and I will just go straight to God.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. We don't need to label a religion, but if we're motivated by love, love of neighbor, that's enough
Mm,
to avoid the war. I don't know that the Russian-Ukraine war that's going on right now is religion based. It seems to me to be territorially
mm,
based. Um, so I don't think it's true that all wars stem from religion. A lot of them do, for sure. But any war, any fighting, if instead of fighting, we went with an approach of love, what does love look like? There wouldn't be war. Like, take it even in your own home. If we operate in love, how would that argument not have happened? Or
mm,
how do we get back into a loving relationship now that we have had a fallout? Can we put our grievances and the offenses behind? Can we move forward in love? That's going to be the only way we're going to get through to it. And to your earlier comment on, where are the dark powers at play?
mm,
Everywhere. Yes, in politics, anywhere where there is an inordinate focus on this world, it's going to play out. So if politics are gung-ho driven by greed and power, it's going to play out there. If a politician is gung-ho on unity and the betterment of humanity and love, less likely to play out there. But I think, in all branches of life, wherever there's a human, there's potential for sin.
mm.
So even in the church.
Yeah. And it's a word that, and again, I respect everything you're saying, and I'm delighted that you're here. And I find myself at times, and not wanting to judge, but even the word sin, I don't see it as we were taught it years ago, if you understand.
Mm, mm,
I believe that morally, most people know what the difference between right and wrong is. But a sin to cast upon yourself and in your mind, does it not lead to you pushing down on the belief that you are good at heart and that we all make mistakes? And if it is an ever loving God, that He, as you said, gives you free will and allows you to learn from those mistakes. Again, when you
absolutely.
don't do it again, of course.
Yeah. Yes, and yeah, he's a compassionate God and he is a forgiving God. I know the term sin isn't valued anymore. It's considered a derogatory term, and perhaps, as you say, because it was misused,
Hmm.
in our younger years. The word sin is a valuable word to be mindful of. It's simply stating that we have erred in a way that grieves God. And if we don't have a vocabulary to express where we are, it's difficult to have a mindset to understand where we are, and it's difficult to therefore make restitution. So just to keep things really, really simple, we can say that was wrong. I need to make right. But if we don't ever label it as wrong, we're never going to make restitution to make it right. The same with the word sin. You know, if I just use that term as I have grieved God, that makes me want to repair the damage I've done in my relationship with God. I have no objection at all to making a confession before God and telling him, you know, I am heartfully sorry, you know, that I've grieved you, and in full expectation that he will have compassion on me and forgive me. You know, I don't fear his wrath if I make confession to him. I welcome his compassion and his love and his restitution of our relationship, you know, such that, you know, my husband and I have an agreement that whenever we see each other sin like that, we will call it out. Now, we don't go, you know, we do it with such tender, loving hearts because we care for each other. And the thing that I care about most for my husband is his relationship with God. Out of all things that I want for him, it's for him to have a fullness of a loving relationship with God. So if there's anything that gets in the way of that, I'm going to say, hey, honey, do you realize this just happened? And you know, 9 times out of 10, I'll say, no, I didn't. Thank you for telling me that. And vice versa. You know, he calls me out. But
Mm.
it's only therapeutically that we can get back right again. And we do that with each other. Hey, I don't know that you meant to hurt me there, but this is how I understood that. And it'll be, oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. Forgive me. You know, I love you. And obviously we know we love each other. But sometimes that love relationship does get bruised. And if we don't have the language to call that out, we don't have the hope for a remedy of restitution. So sin is not a bad word at all. It's just a statement of the relationship. And that's all it is.
Mm. And again, I suppose it's our perspective and on ourselves, on our relationship with God, or on the word sin, as it is with anything. Your relationship to God is a foundation for your life, Andrea, I would say. From hearing
Yeah.
you speak, would you describe it as a waking thought?
A waking thought?
Yes,
You mean like day to day?
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. You know, almost everything I do, I ask God for his thoughts. Do you think this is a good idea? And it's just very casual, you know. I mean, I'm not on my knees in a posture, you know, with my hands together, like, you
Mm.
know, that holy posture.
Mm.
Might be boiling eggs, you know, or weeding the garden. And even when I'm planting my garden, Lord, where do you think this bush should go? And, you know, over here in this corner, oh, yeah, that looks awesome over there. So yeah, my relationship with God is daily.
Mm.
It's just a vein that runs through my body.
Mm. Can you imagine life without it?
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I can look back to my life at college. I was always aware that God was there, but I had no active relationship. I know now looking back, wow, so many places of trouble that I got myself into and didn't really suffer a lot of consequence. I look back and defied all odds in terms of the limited consequences I had for bad behavior. And I look back and I think, okay, that was purely the grace of God, his hand navigating me out of circumstances that I should have been falling flat on my face over and over and over and over and didn't. Um, so even though I wasn't participating on my end of the relationship, I know that God was still there and present. Um, to imagine an absence of presence, well, theologically, that's described as hell. Hell
Mm.
is the absence of the presence of God. I think that is a fantastic description of what hell is. I don't know that there's fire and brimstone, but an absence of God to me certainly would be hell. And it would be the uh, corollary of what we said earlier. Heaven is a full, perfect union with God. That makes theological soundness to me.
Mm. Is the relationship we have with God or higher power, whatever we want to call it, that people need something rather than themselves? That there has to be more to just this person sitting or standing here today out in their garden doing their job, driving their car, looking at the sky, that there has to be more. What if there was nothing more? Just say, Andrea, if there was nothing
Yeah.
more, if it was just us physically standing here.
Yeah, then why would we even exist? Why would we even be here? Um, and why wouldn't we just go hell for leather for whatever, flesh-driven or even evil-driven response that we wanted? Um, yeah, I just my mind breaks down
Yeah.
when it just doesn't make any sense that there's nothing more, you
Yeah.
know. There would be no point even trying to create a legacy, either for good in the world or as an inheritance for my children or my grandchildren, because they're only going to be here and gone tomorrow. It would be pointless, right? So even though I could say, well, my life will be over in 30, 40 years, I can leave something for my kid, but in the grand scheme of eternity, he's only a drop in the ocean too. So that makes no sense. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
And you mentioned also about, a need. I do believe we have a need. Now, I know some atheists, they use that idea of a need to be a weakness, that they say Christianity is a crutch for the weak. I don't see it that way at all. And I think the fact that we need something doesn't make us weak. It makes us human.
Mm.
For me to need a hug from my husband doesn't make me weak. It makes me a loving being in
Mm.
relationship. So there is a need that we have, and some of us fill that with God or a higher power. And I believe there is a gap in every human who is not filling that need with the right spiritual source. Again, to use your language, whatever that spiritual higher
Mm.
power might be, if it's not filled spiritually and fulfilled spiritually, it will never be fulfilled. It is only a God or a higher power shaped whole.
Mm.
Alcohol, drugs, sex, money, power will never fill that hole. If you're filling it with that, it's like the bottom of the bucket is completely wide open. As soon as it's in, it's out, it's gone. You're just looking for the next fix and then the next and the next. And even continually filling it will never fill it. And there is that need, is only a spiritual fix. And I do not see that as a weakness in any shape or form.
Mm.
In fact, I think that differentiates humans from the rest of the animal world in that God has given us that affinity for the spiritual world that he hasn't given trees and animals in the same way, at least, as he's given humans.
Andrea, it has been a pleasure. I hear so much passion, as I said, in your voice. And again, many people may listen to the podcast and disagree wholeheartedly with both of our questions, but that's okay because it's all about opening up the mind being
Mm.
curious, asking yourself the questions of how do I feel about that? What does that mean for me? Because one of the things I did over years, like you, is I would question things and learn to understand it from a perspective of where I was at that time and where I am now.
Yeah,
And that is
yeah.
one of the reasons of this podcast is to listen to other amazing people out there and to see what their perspective and how they're living their life and what gives them purpose in their
Mm.
passion of living the life they want to lead and who they are as individuals, but also connected with this beautiful world of ours. And
Mm.
you have shared so eloquently today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And you're exactly right that, it might be for some and not others. And it ultimately is not about what I say or what we talk about. It's that inner search. It's only going to come from your own inner search.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Andrea. I appreciate your time and your beautiful voice sharing so much. So, if people want to find out more about you, Andrea, if they go on to Truth First Ministry, is that
That's
correct?
right. Yes,
Lo-
that's right, Sharon.
Lovely. And I know you're on YouTube as well if they want to check out some of your beautiful little short videos. I saw them briefly today. And they can contact you directly. Do you ever teach in Ireland at all now, Andrea, or is it mostly all in the States?
It's mostly here, but I do some international teaching, and yeah, I have been thinking lately of doing some teaching in Ireland. So I'll definitely let you know, Sharon, if I'm over there.
I would love to meet you in person. Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank
thank
you
you
so
to
much,
all.
Sharon.
You're welcome. Thank you to everyone for listening and for joining us today. Until next time, take care of you.